Hello, my name is Bill Coughlin, and welcome to First Person Civil War Podcast, which retells the stories of the soldiers and officers on the ground in the battles of the Civil War. Episode 21 is entitled First Sergeant Thomas B. Marshall and the 83rd Ohio at the Siege of Vicksburg, and relies on his book, History of the 83rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, the Greyhound Regiment, which he published in 1912. Thomas B. Marshall lived in Cincinnati, Ohio, prior to the war, and did not enlist in the Army until 14 August 1862. He, along with the other enlisted men, were sent to Camp Dennison, east of Cincinnati, where he was organized into Company K on 26 August 1862, and by mid-September 1862, the 83rd Ohio completed its organization. The 83rd Ohio first saw action at the Battle of Chickasaw Bayou, but were on another part of the battlefield from the 26th Louisiana, which was Episode 5. It was present at other battles such as Arkansas Post and Champion's Hill, all of which were part of the Vicksburg campaign. The 83rd Ohio at this time was in Brigadier General Stephen G. Burbridge's 1st Brigade, of Brigadier General Andrew J. Smith's 10th Division, of Major General John A. McClernand's 13th Corps, and Major General Ulysses S. Grant's Army of the Tennessee. On 18 May 1863, the 83rd Ohio, along with the rest of the Army of the Tennessee, arrived on the outskirts of Vicksburg, trapping what remained of the Confederate Army of Mississippi inside of Vicksburg, alongside the residents of the city. To maintain the initiative, Major General Grant ordered an assault upon Vicksburg on 19 May, which included 1st Sergeant Marshall and the 83rd Ohio, as they advanced along the Baldwin Ferry Road and the Southern Railroad of Mississippi. Our lines were pushing for positions, and for the first time came in sight of those fortifications which we had labored so long and marched so far to attack. It is difficult here to separate the unit from the mass. Difficult to say this regiment was not distinct in its labors and duties from that regiment. The lines were so closely intermingled, the individual members so closely associated in their deadly endeavors, that it is hardly possible to make much distinction. Vicksburg at this time held a prominent place upon the Mississippi River. Taking this city meant complete Union control of the river and would split the Confederacy in two. This meant holding this city was of the utmost importance, which meant it was exceptionally fortified. While writing his book, 1st Sergeant Marshall toured the ground they unsuccessfully assaulted on 19 May, guided by Stephen D. Lee, who was a brigadier general and commander of the Alabamans that defended that part of the line. He said, "We had the only line of continuous hills from the river above to the river below. We had fortified it with the greatest military skill, while to you were left the spurs and the hollows." Now 1st Sergeant Thomas speaking about the ground. "This was a fact. They had all the advantages, while we had all the disadvantages, so that we had to make up in numbers and skill that which would bring about an equality." Another assault upon the Confederate defenses was set for 10 a.m. on 22 May. Rather than use his own account, 1st Sergeant Marshall relied on a memo from a comrade of the regiment to relate the assault of the 83rd Ohio. The troops were massed in sheltered places as quickly and unobservedly as possible. Most of the artillery had, by this time, been placed in position, and at the signal, 200 guns belched forth hoarse thunder. The startled hills trembled to their foundations. The flight of the rifle balls cut the air with horrid screech, and gun and shell polluted all the atmosphere with a sulphurous breath whose fumes rose like exhalations from the infernal pit. On their sector of the 13th Corps' assault, Brigadier General William P. Benton's brigade was in front, with the 83rd Ohio's brigade supporting their advance, which meant they followed behind them. We reached them. That was all. Those massive redoubts and miles of rifle pits had not been built to be turned over with only slight resistance into the hands of the enemy. Every embrasure and every foot of rifle pit blazed and smoked and hissed and hurled volleys of multitudinous death. We reached the brow of the hill and threw ourselves flat upon the ground to escape the withering fire from the trenches. And he continues, "We were so close to the enemy's works that from the front they overlooked us and threw hand grenades into our ranks, while a murderous fire from the hill on our right enfiladed us and depleted our ranks. For 10 long hours we lay upon the brow of that hill in the scorching sun of an unclouded summer's day." Here, the narrative of the unidentified soldier ends, and First Sergeant Marshall completes the story of the 22 May assault. Twilight came, but the conflict ended not until darkness settled down over the hills, and the stars, one by one, silently took their stations in the blue vault above. Then we withdrew and left the field to the enemy and the dead. First Sergeant Marshall then expands on why they stayed in position so long that day. The prolongation of the battle, with the consequent loss, could have been very much curtailed had not McClernand falsely reported that in our front the outer works were in our possession. This caused General Grant to persevere, meaning keeping the men upon the works, which he would not have done had he known the real facts. This statement by First Sergeant Marshall was no mere rumor, but it's even present in Major General Grant's report about the 22 May assault. About 12 p.m., I received a dispatch from McClernand that he was hard-pressed at several points, in reply to which I directed him to reinforce the points hard-pressed from such troops as he had that were not engaged. I then rode around to Sherman, and just reached there when I received a second dispatch from McClernand, stating positively and unequivocally that he was in possession of and still held 2 of the enemy's forts. Major General McClernand sent several dispatches requesting further reinforcements, to which Grant complied, and sent a division from the 17th Corps to McClernand's support. But even with these reinforcements, the assault failed, and Major General Grant had to change his strategy to take Vicksburg. The assault of this day proved the quality of the soldiers of this army. Without entire success, and with a heavy loss, there was no murmuring or complaining, no falling back, nor other evidence of demoralization. After the failure of the 22nd, I determined upon a regular siege. 3 days after the 22 May assault, both armies agreed to a 2.5-hour truce to bury the dead. First Sergeant Marshall and the 83rd Ohio walked toward the Confederate trenches. The silence was most profound. Each side came out, and words were passed as the two armies laughed and joked one another, telling how each was succeeding. Some said they could hold out for 6 months, while others said they were then on half rations. The truce came to an end, and the Battle of Musketry began anew. Though the Confederates successfully repulsed both May assaults, they were still trapped inside Vicksburg, with the Army of the Tennessee besieging the city by land and Federal gunboats patrolling the Mississippi River. As the days of the siege dragged on, the Union trenches became more intricate. First Sergeant Marshall describes the digging of one such rifle pit. The digging during the day had to be done on our knees, always remembering to keep our bodies and heads well down, else we might have no further use for them. In this way, the pits were deepened and widened, affording greater protection. Some trenches were made wide enough and deep enough for the passage of a wagon or piece of artillery, including horses. And he continues, the days of May and June went by in the everlasting dig, dig, digging. By early July, First Sergeant Marshall heard many rumors about the conditions within the city. Here again, he relies on a fellow soldier of the regiment, drummer Thomas J. Chard, on what he saw on the morning of 3 July, 1863. Between 9 and 10 o'clock, the white flag appeared, and 2 Confederate officers came out of their works. Not being on duty, and knowing something unusual was about to happen, I made quick time back to the camp to tell the boys. As I was about returning to the front, I met a captain escorting 2 officers. These men were going to the 10th Division Commander's tent. And he continues, I conducted them there and heard them introduced to General Smith as General Bowen and Colonel Montgomery. I went right up to the tent door with them, saw them enter and take seats. When in not more than 2 minutes, General Smith reappeared, mounted his old bay horse, and was away without any orderly or anyone else, for General Grant's headquarters. What Thomas Chard witnessed was the first attempt to discuss terms for the surrender of Vicksburg. But General Grant did not meet with these men. He would only meet with Lieutenant General Pemberton, the overall Confederate commander. The next day, First Sergeant Marshall and the rest of the Army of the Tennessee heard the news. July 4th, 1863, witnessed the official surrender. It was certainly a sight that filled us with joy to see the enemy come out in front of their forts in long lines, stack their arms, and then leave them. Though the garrison surrendered, First Sergeant Marshall and the 83rd Ohio had no time to rest. Grant sent a portion of his army on 5 July to march east to meet Major General Johnston's Confederate force, which was along the Big Black River, and met him at the Siege of Jackson. The 83rd Ohio remained with the 13th Corps until the end of the war, and participated in further fighting, such as the Red River Campaign. Thomas B. Marshall, when answering the question of why the men of the 83rd Ohio fought in the war, used the battles of Thermopylae and Marathon, where the Greeks defeated the Persians, and the Battle of Lepanto, where the Holy League defeated the Ottoman Empire, as an answer. As it was at Thermopylae, Marathon, and Lepanto, the wheels of time moved forward at Appomattox, and humanity stepped to a higher plane. We not only wiped out our national stain, but, at the same time, showed to the world our existence as a nation, with a brighter outlook for the toiling millions than ever before. It was true that the 83rd Ohio was but one of many units, but one of many pawns of this huge chessboard of fate. The 83rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry Association voted Thomas B. Marshall to write History of the 83rd Ohio Volunteer Infantry, the Greyhound Regiment, which he published in 1912. Though mostly his perspective, he also used the diaries of 4 soldiers to round out the story. This means the unnamed contributor of the 22 May 1863 assault upon Vicksburg was most likely either Peter R. Fortney, John W. Birdsall, William Voorhees, or Charles B. Palmer. The book took several years to write, gathering diaries and general information, and Thomas B. Marshall even included such information as List of Battles, 12, Skirmishes, 5, Distances traveled by rail, 614, by steamer, 7,130, and on the march, 1,831 miles. Thank you for listening to the 21st episode. The link to First Sergeant Marshall's book is now available on the podcast website, firstpersoncivilwarpodcast.com. On Facebook, Instagram, X, and LinkedIn this week, you will find a picture of Thomas B. Marshall in 1912. If you are not following any of the social media accounts, you should consider it. Over the past week, you will find posts that explained why they were known as the Greyhound Regiment, and a depiction from Harper's Weekly of the May assaults upon Vicksburg. At the top of the podcast website, you will find a link to all 4 accounts. Please give them a follow. For episode 22, I have decided to make it a special episode. Captain William W. Goldsboro of Company A, 1st Maryland, and Private George W. Bicknell of Company F, 5th Maine, provide next week's first-person accounts as they face each other at the Battle of First Manassas. My name is Bill Coughlin, and thank you for listening to First Person Civil War Podcast.